Everyone froze when a German Shepherd puppy began wailing the moment he saw the old man walk in. Tears streamed down the man's face as he whispered the puppy's name. But just when it seemed like a happy ending, something happened that left the entire shelter in stunned silence. The shelter had seen countless dogs come and go, but none broke their hearts quite like the little German Shepherd puppy in Kennel 14. He couldn't have been more than 6 months old, with oversized paws he hadn't yet grown into and eyes far too sad for someone so young. They found him alone on the side of the highway, shivering in a ditch as cars thundered past. His fur was caked with dirt, and every time a vehicle roared by, he ducked his head as if bracing for a blow. When the animal control officer finally coaxed him into the truck, he didn't fight. He just curled up and whimpered, pressing his nose into the seat like he was trying to hide. From the first night, it was clear this puppy wasn't just lost. He was grieving. As the shelter lights dimmed and the other dogs settled, he would start to cry, a thin, heartbroken wail that echoed down the hall. Volunteers took turns sitting by his cage, whispering soft words, but nothing soothed him for long. "He's looking for someone," one of them said quietly, watching him lift his head every time the front door creaked open. Day after day, he searched every face that passed his kennel. He would stand up, ears straining forward, a glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes, only to collapse again when the stranger kept walking. They called him Chance, hoping that somehow he would find the person he was so desperate to see again. Henry hadn't planned on going to the shelter that day. The old man had spent most of the morning staring out the kitchen window, the coffee in his mug gone cold. He still set out 2 bowls every morning, one for himself, one for the pup who wasn't there anymore. After his wife passed, the little German Shepherd puppy had been the only thing that kept the house from feeling completely empty. He named the dog Buddy, though it felt silly at first. But over time, Buddy had become exactly that, his friend, his shadow, the reason he got up each day. Until the accident point one rainy afternoon, Buddy had slipped out the front gate. Henry searched for hours, calling until his voice cracked. Days passed, and the posters he taped to telephone poles turned soft with rain. Neighbors tried to help, but the trail went cold. Eventually, people stopped asking if he'd had any luck. Henry never stopped hoping, but he had stopped believing he would ever see that little face again. That morning, something nudged at him, a feeling he couldn't name. On a whim, he put on his coat, grabbed his cane, and drove to the shelter. The woman at the front desk greeted him kindly, offering to show him the kennels. As they walked past row after row of dogs, Henry kept his eyes down. He told himself he was only there to look. He couldn't bear another heartbreak. But when they turned the corner, a sound stopped him in his tracks, a soft, strangled whimper that seemed to carry every ounce of sorrow he'd felt since the day Buddy disappeared. Slowly, Henry lifted his head and looked into the cage at the end of the ROW. First, Henry thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The puppy had grown taller since he'd last seen him, his legs long and awkward. But there was no mistaking those eyes, warm brown and so heartbreakingly familiar. The German Shepherd stood pressed against the wire, his whole body trembling. His tail wagged once, then again, unsure whether to trust what he was seeing. Buddy? Henry rasped, voice cracking around the name. The puppy let out a high, broken cry. It was the same sound he'd made when Henry left the room, the desperate wail of a dog who couldn't bear to be apart from his person. Tears blurred Henry's vision as he dropped to his knees in front of the cage. "Oh, Buddy!" A hush fell over the shelter. Volunteers paused where they stood, watching with wide eyes as the old man pressed his palm against the wire. Buddy shoved his nose through the gap and licked Henry's fingers so frantically it looked almost painful. He pawed at the fence, nails clicking against the metal as he tried to get closer. His cries rose, louder and more insistent, until they filled the whole building. Henry rested his forehead against the cage door, his shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I tried to find you." Buddy whined, pressing his head harder against the bars. For one perfect moment, it felt as though all the lonely days and nights had never happened. They were just 2 souls who belonged to each other, finally reunited. But as Henry pulled back to look into those pleading eyes, a heavy dread settled in his chest. He knew this reunion wouldn't be as simple as opening the cage and carrying Buddy home. A young shelter worker approached quietly, her eyes damp with emotion. She crouched beside Henry, her voice soft. "Sir, is this your dog?" Henry nodded, though it felt like the smallest word he'd ever spoken. "His name is Buddy. He's mine." She swallowed hard, glancing at her clipboard. "I believe you," she said gently. "But we have a process. We'll need proof of ownership, photos, vet records, and there are some fees you'd need to pay before he can be released." Henry's heart sank. He'd been living on a fixed income since retiring, and most of his savings had gone to hospital bills after his wife passed. Even with every spare dollar, he didn't have enough to cover the adoption fees, vaccinations, and penalties for Buddy's time at the shelter. "How much?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. She hesitated. "Almost $400. The number hit him like a physical blow. His throat closed. He looked at Buddy, still whining, still pressing his face against the bars as if he could slip through by sheer will. I don't have that kind of money," Henry whispered, ashamed. The worker laid a hand on his shoulder. "We can give you a little time to gather what you need, but we can't hold him indefinitely." Buddy's cries grew louder. Henry clutched the fence with white-knuckled hands, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, boy," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." Around them, volunteers stood in silent witness, their hearts breaking as they watched the old man who had finally found his lost friend and realized he might have to walk away again. Henry sat slumped on the bench outside the kennels, his head in his hands. Inside, Buddy's cries had finally quieted to low, exhausted whimpers. The shelter worker stood nearby, giving him space but refusing to leave altogether. "I'll figure something out," Henry murmured, though he didn't know how. He had no family left to call, no credit cards he hadn't already maxed out trying to keep his house. He pressed his palm to his chest, trying to ease the ache there. Just then, the worker took a tentative step forward. "Sir, would you mind if I took a photo of you and Buddy?" He blinked at her, confused. "A photo?" She nodded. "Sometimes when people see a story like yours, they want to help." Too tired to argue, Henry followed her back into the shelter. He knelt by Buddy's cage once more. The puppy, sensing him near, crawled forward and laid his head against Henry's hand. The volunteer snapped a single picture. An old man's lined face pressed to the bars, a dog's eyes closed in exhausted relief. She posted it on the shelter's social media page with a simple caption, "After months apart, Buddy and his owner found each other today, but they can't go home together yet." By morning, something incredible had happened. Strangers all over town shared the post. Donations poured in, $5 here, $20 there. Some came from people Henry had never met, others from neighbors who remembered him walking Buddy down the street. When he returned to the shelter the next day, the receptionist's eyes were shining. "It's all covered," she whispered. "Every penny." The moment the cage door swung open, Buddy leapt into Henry's arms, and this time, no one was ever going to make them say goodbye again.